Well, g'day. Thanks so much for joining me. It's Lyle Shelton with the Macquarie Street Political Podcast. This is a reboot of a podcast that I was running for several years, and just keen to come to you with my take on the news of the week. As you will know, I'm with the Family First political party. I'm the national director. I'm interested in political commentary, but I want to do more than commentary. I want to back up that commentary with action. So the idea of talking about the news and the issues is talking about issues which I think we as a political party can bring some weight to bear as we get people into Parliament, as we contest elections over the coming months and really the next, 18 months to 2 years. There are opportunities for our party. But this has been a big week politically, and there's been a couple of issues that have really been burdening me as an Australian. And I guess the first of those is what we saw on the Harbour Bridge at the weekend on Sunday. I was interstate on Sunday. I normally reside here in Sydney. I could actually see the Sydney Harbour Bridge from my balcony in the far off distance. But nonetheless, it's an iconic symbol of the city, of our nation of Australia. And I guess coming after the Opera House was desecrated, its forecourt, its steps on October 8, as bodies were still warm in Israel after Hamas and a whole bunch of Gazans, thousands of them, invaded Israel, having breached the security fence, and were chanting things like gas the Jews, or the police later said, where's the Jews? It's inconclusive on the audio from that night. But that, I think, was an embarrassment as an Australian, because you remember the instigation for that rally was the decision by the Premier, Chris Minns, to immediately light up the Opera House with the Israeli flag, the blue and the white Star of David. And that was unable to go ahead because a baying mob turned up at the Opera House chanting those despicable chants that were anti-Semitic. Instead of decrying Hamas and the rape and the slaughter and the kidnapping, these people were targeting their anger at Israel in a very anti-Semitic way. So that was the Opera House. But then fast forward to last Sunday, and we saw this so-called March for Humanity organised, and there are reports of up to 100,000 people potentially having walked on the Harbour Bridge, crossing the Harbour Bridge as part of that. And you might recall that the New South Wales Police and the Premier, Chris Minns, said that they didn't think the march should go ahead, not because they were anti-free speech, but because of the impact on Sydney traffic, the safety concerns with so many people on the bridge. But a court decision late on Friday, I believe, or late Saturday, I think even the day before the protest, overruled the police and the elected government of New South Wales to allow that to go ahead. Now, I think there's a real issue there. I think the political leaders, so long as they're not stopping freedom of speech, they should be allowed to make these decisions in the public interest. But nonetheless, the rally went ahead. I've got some footage of that rally I'd like to show you. Now you can see in that footage, this is taken from social media, you can see footage of ISIS flags, and the chant there is death, death to the IDF. Now just think about that. This is Australia, a country that we're proud of. Israel has been an ally of Australia ever since it was created in 1948. In fact, the great Labor statesman Doc Herbert Everett was at the United Nations and played an instrumental role in the international community's decision to allow the state of Israel to be founded there in the ancient land of the Jews. They're indigenous people to that land, and yet they were attacked viciously and mercilessly by an Islamic death cult called Hamas on October 7. And of course, the Israeli Defence Force responded on behalf of the Israeli people, so they should have. And it's been a difficult war. It's urban warfare. But what we do know is that the death to combatant, the civilian to combatant death rate is the lowest in urban warfare since World War II. Now, there's been a lot of urban warfare since World War II, particularly in Iraq and Afghanistan, where the civilian death count was far worse. The ratio of soldiers to civilians killed far worse under the Americans, the British, and even the Australians, sadly, in those conflicts than what it has been in Gaza. The Israelis are very careful. Now, is it perfect? Of course not. Have mistakes been made? Of course they have. The Israeli Defence Force and the Israeli government are not beyond criticism, but this is a war zone. You're dealing with a death cult, with an army that is hell-bent on destroying Israel. And to see Australians on the Harbour Bridge chanting death, death to the IDF, that just makes my heart sink. Because if Australia was attacked in that way, and our army went rightly to defend us, and people were then chanting death, death to the ADF, I think we'd be rightly incensed. And I think Israeli people would be rightly offended by what Australians were doing on one of our most iconic structures at the weekend. This is really, really terrible stuff. The idea that Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza is farcical. Now, as I say, it's a war zone. I'm not saying that all the military tactics are perfect, but the idea that there's a deliberate genocide where Israel is trying to wipe out the Palestinian population is nonsense. And Neil Ferguson wrote a terrific article in the Australian newspaper this week saying there's a genocide going on, but it's not in Israel, and that's in Russia, with Russia trying to wipe out the Ukrainians. Vladimir Putin is targeting civilians, no doubt. Whereas the Israeli army, they send text messages, drop leaflets, establish humanitarian corridors, do their best with their airstrikes to ensure that civilians are not harmed where possible. Now, as I say, it's not perfect, and civilians, of course, have been killed, and that's a terrible tragedy. But it's nowhere near the ratio of civilians killed in conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. And yet we don't hear of any of this. So there's no genocide. I was listening to the Trigonometry podcast last week. This is the very, very famous podcast. And they were interviewing a British army officer who studies urban warfare. And he made it very clear that there's plenty of aid going into Gaza. The UN, of course, won't cooperate with the Israeli authorities, the Gazan humanitarian organisation that is now administering aid. Why are they doing that? Why did the Israelis and the Americans take over aid? Was because Hamas was stealing the aid and feeding their terrorist army and selling the aid back to the civilian population at exorbitant rates. Hamas is an organisation that hides behind civilians, that will sacrifice women and children and use them as human shields. It glories in the killing of its own people for propaganda purposes. And sadly, what we saw on the Harbour Bridge was a whole bunch of well-meaning people. We all want to stop the war. Of course we do. But they delivered a massive propaganda victory to Hamas, and for their craven use of their own people as human shields. It's in their interests to starve them, to see them killed. They delight in this. They've said as much because it turns world opinion against the state of Israel. I thought the Spectator magazine, their cover was released last night by Rowan Dean, its editor, and this is a brilliant cartoon. People might recall the image of the Israeli hostage digging his own grave, released on the actual day of the Harbour Bridge March. And this is a satirical version of that. You've got Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer and Anthony Albanese and Mark Carney from Canada digging the grave of Western civilization. That is brilliant satire. Sadly, if you didn't laugh, you'd cry, because this is very, very true. So well done to Rowan Dean and his team there with that. And I'd commend the articles in the Spectator. James Allen's article that dropped this morning for this week's Spectator really does excoriate the idea that there's a Palestinian state to recognise. I wish there were, but who does Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese think they can recognise? Hamas is currently still in control. The Palestinian Authority, well, they support terrorism. They hate Israel. Who is the partner for peace in that area? These are the sort of questions that have got to be asked if we're going to be serious about peace in the Middle East. And sadly, our government is hell bent on making Israel the villain in this instead of Hamas. And I just have to say that the Harbour Bridge March and what's been happening here in this nation really does make me ashamed to be an Australian. I'm in despair at the lack of social cohesion we have over this, the fact that so many of our Muslim friends in Western Sydney seem to support Hamas. Our intellectual class are anti-Israel and seem to have lost their moral compass when it comes to who's in the right and who's in the wrong when it comes to this terrible war in Gaza. So let's hope and pray that it's over soon and that Hamas is overthrown and that Gaza can be rebuilt as a habitable place for the Palestinian Arabs. And who knows, maybe one day they will have their own state, but we'd need to see who is truly the partner for peace, who can really lead at that time. Well, that's all I want to say about the Harbour Bridge. I've said a lot about that. Very disappointing. The other big news that dropped this week was a Productivity Commission report about net zero. Now, you will have noticed in the news several coalition politicians, Barnaby Joyce, Michael McCormack, both former Deputy Prime Ministers, have joined outspoken voices like Matt Canavan and Alex Antic in really saying we've got to drop this net zero thing. And I agree with them. And I've been saying this for years. Family First has been saying it for years. We've been voices in the wilderness, but now some senior coalition MPs are starting to really speak out. The Productivity Commission released a report this week. They didn't really put costings on it. They said it's going to cost a lot more than we expected. No surprises there. It's a transition that won't be cheap or easy. And the Productivity Commission has made some pretty interesting recommendations to try and expedite the so-called transition. It's a transition that I don't believe is possible or feasible from an engineering or an economic point of view. It's destabilising our electricity grid. And one of the things, or some of the things that the Productivity Commission recommends is streamlined environmental approvals. Now, this is so that the tops of the Great Dividing Range can be bulldozed more quickly. So we destroy the environment, we cut corners on our environmental approvals so that windmill towers can go up. These have tons and tons of concrete at their base to hold them. In some places, some farming areas around the area of Young in New South Wales, they're talking about wind towers as tall as James Packer's iconic skyscraper at Barangaroo, if you know that building there at the Star Casino, at the Crown Casino at Barangaroo in Sydney. That's Australia's, one of Australia's tallest buildings, wind towers that size. But they're talking about streamlining the environmental approval. So it's very difficult to get a productive mine going in Australia. But if you want to put up wind towers or carpet, good agricultural land with solar panels, you can fast track the approval process there. It's just ridiculous. The Productivity Commission is warning that if we want to achieve our net zero targets by 2050, we've got to phase out gas more quickly. Now, this is counterintuitive because most of the commentary around net zero and the so-called energy transition has recognised that we've got to have gas in the system because wind and solar are intermittent, and you've got to have firming capability so that you have that constant source of electricity when we all need it. It's called baseload power. But they're saying we've got to phase out gas more quickly. It's unclear how we're going to be able to get reliable electricity. And of course, what we're seeing is that the price of electricity continues to go up. We're told that renewables are supposed to be cheaper. The wind and the sun is free, but of course the infrastructure to harness the wind and the sun is not free. And it's intermittent. It's not on all the time like a coal-fired power station is, or a gas-fired power station, or a nuclear-fired power or nuclear-powered station like they have in many parts of the world. But we've got to, even have less gas. So it's unclear how the Productivity Commission thinks that we can run a modern economy. And of course, people are walking away from net zero all over the world. Germany went furthest down this track. They're backtracking really, really quickly, having found it to be an absolute failure. The former Labour Prime Minister of Great Britain, Tony Blair, one of these climate change alarmists, he's now saying net zero is unachievable. Of course, America under Donald Trump and their administration, they know that economically and from an engineering point of view, it's not feasible. They're drilling to get fossil fuels into the system more quickly. Trump has famously said he hates windmills. They destroy the environment. He's absolutely right. They can't produce electricity. America's not in this game. China is not in this game. Indonesia is not in this game. India is not in this game. Why Australia is just ridiculous. And it's great to see Barnaby Joyce talking as only he can. He's one of the best political communicators, but saying this is making us poor, it's making pensioners cold, and it's hurting Australia for no good reason. And I pay tribute to Barnaby Joyce. But I also am critical of him because he was the Deputy Prime Minister and the leader of the National Party, which made an infamous decision back in 2021 to put Scott Morrison on the plane to Glasgow, where he signed our nation up to net zero. That was a big mistake. They knew it was wrong at the time, but they went for it anyway. Probably Barnaby didn't really support it, but he didn't have the numbers in his party room. And of course, the coalition signed us onto this. And of course, Labor under Chris Bowen, and you can see on the screen there, Jim Chalmers, Matt Keane, former Liberal Energy Minister here in New South Wales, now the head of Anthony Albanese's Climate Change Authority. These men are driving our nation over a cliff, and it's not going to work. It can't work, and I predict in a few short years we'll be changing tack as this fails and as our electricity becomes unaffordable and unreliable. It's a real problem for our nation. It's the biggest economic issue facing our nation. And look, Family First is very committed to stopping this. We are a small political party. We've got no one in Parliament yet, but we are campaigning very hard to get people elected who will fight against net zero and get our nation back on a pathway of reliable and affordable electricity that's based on coal, gas, and then if we need to go to net zero, well, that's got to be through nuclear, because there's no other technology that will deliver zero emissions apart from nuclear technology in a way that can keep a modern economy functioning and the lifestyles to which we expect and have become accustomed to. I want to move on now to the other big news this week. If you've been following the court, the federal court is hearing an appeal brought by Sal Grover, the founder of the Giggle for Girls smartphone application. It was meant to be an online social media platform for women only. And back in about 2021, 2022, a biological male by the name of Roxanne Tickle tried to become a member of that. Roxanne Tickle identifies as a woman. Sal Grover said no, and booted Roxanne Tickle off the app. Roxanne Tickle then sued Sal Grover, took her to court, and you can see on the screen there Roxanne Tickle on the left, Sal Grover on the right. I think it's pretty clear who the woman is there and who the woman is not. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to Roxanne Tickle. I don't know what's gone on in his life, why he feels he needs to dress that way, why he feels he needs to force the point. But the problem is that the Sex Discrimination Act was amended in 2013 when Julia Gillard was Prime Minister to insert the words gender identity. Now that's really important because gender identity, as a result of a amendment put forward in the Parliament, means that gender identity is a protected attribute under the Sex Discrimination Act. And that means it's against the law for anyone to discriminate against someone who identifies as someone who not their normal natal gender, which Roxanne Tickle now identifies as a biological man, now identifying as a woman. So that's a protected attribute. Now, he went to court last year, sued Sal Grover in the federal court. Sal Grover lost. Justice Bromwich said that sex is changeable, and that the Sex Discrimination Act means that it's no longer lawful for women to have their own spaces, and that they have to allow a biological male who identifies as a woman into their space. This has huge ramifications for the safety of girls, because it means that a biological male even with a penis, who says he's a woman, is allowed to go into girls' toilets, compete against women in sport, and have all the other rights of girls and women. It's a farcical, ridiculous situation, and I really admire the bravery of Sal Grover in taking this on. So she lost last year. She's appealed. 3 days of hearings were held before the full bench of the federal court this week in Sydney, just finishing yesterday. And look, it was very instructive what's come out in that case. One of the interesting developments was a last-minute intervention in the case by an organisation called Equality Australia. Now, I know these guys because when I was at Australian Christian Lobby and involved with the Coalition for Marriage, you might remember back to 2017 in the marriage campaign, we fought an organisation called Australian Marriage Equality, which was trying to change the definition of marriage. And they said, look, all we're fighting is for, love is love, and for two people of the same sex to get married. No other consequences, nothing to see here. Well, they won that debate. Famously, in 2017, the law was changed, marriage was degendered. But Australian marriage equality didn't go away after the same-sex marriage plebiscite. They just rebadged. They are now called Equality Australia, and they popped up again this week, intervening in this case of Roxanne Tickle against Sal Grover's Giggle smartphone application, Giggle for Girls. And this was interesting. This happened in the court this week. The Counsel for Equality Australia, Ruth Higgins, SC, that's senior counsel, that's the equivalent of a King's Counsel, told the court that the question of sex should be answered at the point in time when the alleged discrimination takes place, and its meaning will reflect conventional conditions as they exist from time to time. Now, that's a whole lot of gobbledygook. That's code for, if at any point in his life a man wants to be a woman, he must not be discriminated against and must be allowed into all women's private spaces and sports or else, because the discrimination can happen at whatever time the person decides to identify as someone of the opposite sex. Now, this also applies to girls' private spaces and sports. Higgins went on to say that the Sex Discrimination Act, this is the law or the legal statute, which I referred to earlier, of which Grover has been found to have been in breach by discriminating against Tickle, by booting Tickle out of the Giggle for Girls social media application. The Council for Equality Australia, remember this is the former same-sex marriage people, has moved beyond the idea that sex or gender is binary, that it is male or female. So, sex, gender, it's not binary, it's not male or female according to Equality Australia. Now, remember, Equality Australia, as I said, these are the people who ran the same-sex marriage campaign. This is the people who are the rainbow political activists. When you see a rainbow flag, that's their political flag. This is what they believe. Ruth Higgins, SC, went on to say, sex is a way of classifying people along a scale between a man at one end and a woman at the other. But as a matter of ordinary meaning, the statute, that's the Sex Discrimination Act, is agnostic as to where persons are plotted along that scale. So it says that, gender, whether you or I are a boy or a girl, that can be on a scale, on a continuum. And of course, this is what they teach children in school through things like the so-called Safe Schools program. This idea of gender fluidity is what flies under the rainbow flag. And of course, they're in court fighting for this issue in their support of Roxanne Tickle. Higgins told the court that under the Sex Discrimination Act, designation of sex is initially a social act performed by someone in respect of someone else based on certain anatomical markers. Now let's just think about this, because these people say that sex is something that's assigned at birth based on anatomical markers. What Equality Australia is saying is that if a midwife, a doctor, a mum or a dad in the birthing suite see a baby come out and there's anatomical markers, i.e. genitalia, it's wrong to just assume that that baby is a boy or a girl. Now, most normal mums or dads would really disagree with this proposition, but this was the proposition being advanced in the federal court this week, that you can't just designate sex based on certain anatomical markers. This is crazy stuff, folks, but this is what Sal Grover's fighting for in court. This is what the people who ran the same-sex marriage plebiscite are fighting for, to try and uphold. And of course, this is a slap in the face, as I said, to every midwife, doctor, mum, dad present at the birth of a child, in which 99.999% of cases of a child being born, there's absolutely no doubt about the meaning of the anatomical markers with which a baby is born. When a midwife tells a mum it's a girl, she's not performing a social act based on a false simplicity, which were the other words that that Ruth Higgins, senior counsel, used in the court today. So this is Australia's "What is a Woman" case. I really hope and pray that Sal wins this case. I think the chances are probably fairly dubious, given that Justice Bromwich said that the Sex Discrimination Act means that sex is changeable. But perhaps where they have a point at law, and law professors such as Neil Foster from the University of Newcastle have advanced this proposition, is that despite this idea that sex is changeable, there's a legal case that women should be able to have their women-only spaces, and if they can prove that that's okay, in the case, in the same way that there can be a women-only gym, that maybe there's a chance that they can get around this law. But I don't like the chances because, it seems like we've got a flawed piece of legislation which says even if you identify as a woman, you should be allowed in that space. It's interesting that the Lesbian Action Group, they have also intervened in this case, but not on the side of the rainbow political activists, under which they normally would fly, but they've actually intervened under the side of Sal Grover because they don't like the idea that a woman can have a penis. And look, I can sympathise with the Lesbian Action Group, and that's why they're fighting. So what we're seeing here is, the rainbow political movement has really become the snake that's swallowing its own tail here, and it's become quite farcical. It's embarrassing for our nation that we've got a court case going on like this. It's made international headlines. It's been terrific to see J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author, weighing in on social media on Sal Grover's side. She posted an image of Tickle and Sal Grover side by side, saying, may the woman win. And look, she's poking a bit of fun. Again, I don't mean that as any disrespect to Roxanne Tickle, but it is crazy. He should not be taking this on in the courts. And I just want to say one final thing about all this. And the blame for this lies fairly and squarely with the Liberal and the Labor Party and the weakness of our politicians. Because when the Sex Discrimination Act was amended in the Parliament in 2013, and I remember it well, I was a lobbyist in Canberra at the time, look, in fairness to us all, none of us quite realised what the consequences of this were. I knew it was going to be bad because it was being pushed by the people who were agitating for same-sex marriage. I think most politicians didn't realise what the consequences were. They didn't realise you'd end up in a situation like this, but they should have had the courage to at least drill down and work out what it was they were voting on. This was waved through the Parliament with no dissent. It was passed on the voices, essentially unanimously. There was no division held. So Liberal and Labor both voted for it. It was moved by the then Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus. Julia Gillard, ironically, our first female Prime Minister, was the Prime Minister at the time when we changed the definition of woman in the Sex Discrimination Act to say a woman could have a penis. I mean, it's just farcical stuff. Our politicians voted for this. They've known for many years that this is a problem. There isn't the courage to deal with it. Peter Dutton was asked about this during the election campaign, and he said he wasn't going to touch it. You might recall that Donald Trump became president, and he made a big thing about the fact that US policy was now going to recognise biological sex as it normally is. Dutton refused to weigh into that. He refused to say whether he would amend the Sex Discrimination Act to fix this in Australia. Several of his shadow cabinet, people like Dave Sharma, flat out said no, wouldn't change the Sex Discrimination Act, think that's fine. Shame on Dave Sharma. People like Andrew Bragg, of course, Simon Birmingham, who's no longer in the Parliament, has been running obstruction towards changing this for a long time. Kudos to Alex Antic. He tried to put up a bill in the Senate just the other week, within the last fortnight, to amend the Sex Discrimination Act to restore the definition of woman, but that was rebuffed. Shame on Susan Lee. It should be a coalition bill. It shouldn't have to be a private senator's bill. Clearly the coalition, which is supposed to be the conservative side of politics, don't have an appetite for changing this, and that's a real problem. So, look, this is a crazy case. The hearings finished yesterday. The full bench of the federal court will now go away and write its judgment. No one really knows how long that might take. We could probably typically expect, 3 to 6 months before we know the outcome of this. Sal Grover has said if she loses again, she'll go all the way to the High Court. And I think good on her. It's going to need this. But really, if our politicians would do their job, this could be fixed by simply amending the Sex Discrimination Act to take out that phrase, gender identity, as a protected attribute. That would fix the problem and provide everyone with a lot more certainty, and it would protect girls and women from the encroachment of biological males. Well, look, that's all I'd like to talk about this week on the Macquarie Street Political Podcast. Just a reminder that the Family First National Conference is coming up in just a few weeks. You can go to familyfirstparty.org.au and click on the icon there, the graphic that says Politics of Truth. We've got an amazing lineup of speakers. In fact, at the dinner, which is being the conference dinner, which is being held on Friday, September 5, our guest speaker is Catherine Deeves. She is the solicitor for Sal Grover, who I've just been talking about in the Giggle v Tickle case. She is Sal Grover's solicitor, so she's been in court every day, and I'm sure she'll have some fascinating insights to share with us. She'll also be talking about childcare policy and how we can help mums who want to choose to look after their kids at home. So that's going to be the dinner on the Friday night. Go to familyfirstparty.org.au. Click on Politics of Truth. You'll see information about not only the conference dinner, tickets to that are sold separately. Then the conference itself on Saturday, September 6th, is going to be terrific. We've got an amazing lineup of speakers. Rachel Wong from Women's Forum Australia. Again, she'll be talking about some of these gender ideology issues. We've got a big segment on net zero. Jared Holland, who's a gun researcher at the Page Research Institute, that's the National Party's think tank. He'll be talking about net zero. The title of his talk is Net Zero Truth. Professor Ian Plimer is going to talk about why the climate changes. We've got Bella Debrera from the Institute of Public Affairs talking about the indoctrination of children through the education system, right from early childhood all the way through to university. We really need to create awareness of what's going on if we're going to fix the problem. Jack Snelling, who's on the Family First Federal Executive and one of the founders of the rebooted Family First, will be giving a report on our federal election activities. We ran 100 candidates. It was a terrific campaign. You won't want to miss Jack's presentation there. We've got a whole bunch of other speakers. We're going to be talking about abortion as healthcare. Roseanne Masters, homegrown Family First volunteer, and one of our great activists and someone who's really helped me personally with my campaigns. She'll be talking. One of the things I'm really proud of is we're going to be showcasing some of our young guns. We had some terrific younger candidates. We are a bit of an older crowd at Family First, not embarrassed or ashamed of that. Grateful for the older people who support our movement, but we had some terrific young candidates as well. These are young mums and dads in their late 20s, early 30s who really get what we're on about. And so you're going to hear from Holly Chu, who was our candidate up in New England, and Jared Athval from out in Western Sydney, and Cedar McMahon. So you'll love what you have to hear from these guys. Sorry, not McMahon. McMahon, one of the Western Sydney seats. We had 100 candidates. It's hard to remember them all, but you're going to love hearing what the next generation has to say. So go to familyfirstparty.org.au, register for the conference dinner. And for the conference itself, it's going to be held here in Sydney at the Epping Club. Terrific venue. The food is fantastic. The catering is going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. We've already got 100 people registered for the conference, which is amazing for a small political party like us. It really does show there's a movement brewing. So we'd love to see you there as well. Well, thanks for tuning in today. Great to see so many of you online. I'm going to be back again next week, probably on Friday, doing this live. Friday of next week is the plan, but we'll let you know. And please tell your friends about this podcast. Looking to do it every week. A bit of a recap of the news, often with a guest. Today it's just me, but you can see that the issues we've covered are really serious and really important. But really appreciate your company. And until next week, all the best and keep speaking up.